Hello. Today we are talking about the participation in democracy, whether it is supposed to be compulsory for each citizen of legal age to participate in all kinds of democratic processes. What is the degree of the responsibility for the country's politics, whether it lies upon people that do not want to participate in political life, or it cannot be blamed on these people. And this topic has been proposed by Oksana Vovchenko, the leader and the head of the Benjamin Franklin Club. And she is joining us from Odessa. And we will have this wonderful and very interesting and engaging conversation today about this topic. Thank you for offering this topic. So would you like to tell us a bit more of your vision of this problem?
Yes, I would like to tell why we raise this question right now. It comes from the argument between Ukrainians and Russians, mostly about if a person responsible for what is going on. The general position of Ukrainians is that all citizens are responsible for the politics of their country. General position of Russians that they are not responsible for the politics of their country. So the war is a result of just a decision of few people, and anybody can influence that. So they don't want to be responsible. And this argument comes to be harder and harder recently because we expect them to start revolution. They are not going to do that. This is two different pictures of the world, two different societies.
Yeah, but as we always do, we have to go deeper than politics. And deeper than politics is biology. What is the biological basis for political behavior, right? So leadership is always a question of power. And those who have power, they try to suppress everybody else. But this power has to be based on support of the common members of this group, because even very powerful leader can be overthrown if the majority of the group members are not in agreement with him or her being in power. So those principles we can see in most of the biological groups where there's the hierarchy and where there's leadership and the followers that follow this leader. And in certain time, with a certain mechanism, even in this wild world, the leader is get out, and there's a new leader in the group, right? So that's the basis for our behavior, and it's still the same. We are pretty wild creatures. We are very barbaric still. Very tiny layer of civilization that we are proud of is really tiny. Another biological factor is that we never get a person coming to the world as a mature individual. It's always a baby that is sculptured by the society, including the propaganda, including the myths and influence of his parents, whether he supports their views or he's opposite to their views, opposes their views, but it's always in the same plane with these views. So it's another problem that it's hard to expect from a person that has been sculptured by certain environment would revolt against this environment. Even if the person is coming from the foreign environment, there are a number of Ukrainians that live in Russia. And they have no other choice but openly to support what Russia does. I have a knowledge of facts that those who got the Russian citizenship and previously were Ukrainians, they have been called by officials and asked about their positions, whether they're loyal or not. And to live in internal conflict, like outwardly to support the official position and inwardly to be rebellious, it's quite difficult. It requires a lot of resources. It requires the clear purpose. Why? What's the reason why they would feel uncomfortable with themselves? And many people, they just try to accept the easiest way of denial, to deny what's going on in Ukraine, to deny the fact that they are living in barbaric, cruel, ruthless, outrageous society, which can lead pointless, murderous war operation, which can last forever. And just the denial is the best way. And they get help from two sources: the absence of alternative views by eliminating all the alternative sources of the information, media, and very strong propaganda, which is coming out of each and every source of the information. So therefore, we get an individual that if you actually ask this individual what's his real thoughts, being in this situation that he has his internal convictions and beliefs and expressing different beliefs outwardly, he would even say probably that he supports whatever Russia does. He'll try to justify and even find the good things using the same propaganda he has been supplied with. The problem with human mind is we can prove anything. We can prove anything. If you want someone to talk about cannibalism, eating each other, he can make a very nice lecture why it is wise and good and very progressive, right? So we see that even if these people are so oppressed at such level that they are limited with their abilities to do things, they still will follow through the main trend. For the strong revolutionary movement, unfortunately, there should be a very strong, well-organized force that would lead this movement. Unfortunately, many times it happens that it's a foreign intrusion, right? But Russians worked hard to exclude those possibilities of intrusions. They started with this ban for different sources that were supporting this, closing down the media outlets. So therefore, answering your inquiry is that the old mechanisms that exist since the civilization exists are still working. People are not very fond of sacrificing themselves when they don't see the strong incentive to do this. And expecting from them such actions are not very pragmatic approach. Don't you think so?
But what incentive should be to engage them into politics?
The certain organizational force can do this. Right now, if you're talking about the pure democracy, which doesn't exist in any way, anywhere, it is supposed to that the free will of the person, individual, can be expressed by his voting habits. But there are so many obstacles on this way, not only propaganda, but also how the voting process is designed. What are the candidates? Many times in the progressive countries in the West, we are very frustrated with the democratic processes because you don't have the real choice. When you have two candidates that you don't want either, you usually, if you participate, then you are participating against the candidate that you think is worse, not for the candidate that you believe is good, but against the one who is worse. And that's terrible, and that's terrible. The voting fraud, well, in some countries it's more prominent. Obviously in Russia the results will be as they design them and not the real one. But with all those factors, they even probably do not need to do any fraud or much fraud, because people are trying to be loyal to the source of their income. They don't want this trouble. And for example, in Soviet Union, that probably you remember, and I remember for sure, what is called the spirit of the people was rebellious. I don't know what was the source of that, but most of the people did not support neither communism, nor the party, nor the politics of the Soviet government. They were very in a position internally. It was fashionable. It was prominent, and that's why when Glasnost came by, it blowed up immediately, because internally people were rebellious. They wanted the change. They considered the West as a source of all paradise on earth. Right? That was even me. That's how I saw the foreign countries. I thought that's the paradise on earth. And Soviet, everything what was Soviet was just outdated and stupid, and nobody wanted to keep this. That's not the case in Russia right now, I believe. And I do not quite know why this situation has created in early days of the reforms before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Some say it was influence of the foreign voices. I don't believe so. I don't think that many people really listen to those voices. They have been suppressed The broadcast was not very efficient. I don't know what really make it. Maybe the misery of life, inability to buy cigarettes, alcohol, all those unfortunate things. Maybe this thing, I don't know. So again, COVID situation has shown how inactive and loyal the population is. It was a very good sign that you can do anything with these people. You can tell them, like in this old Soviet joke, we will hang you tomorrow, and only one is raising his hand. And they ask, what do you want to ask? He says, should I bring the rope with me, or the ropes will be distributed? The rope. So the level of loyalty, of obedience, of the readiness to comply shows how inactive people are. And another thing is, with the same thing as COVID, obvious failures to stop the pandemics, obvious failure of the vaccines. Nobody is paying attention to, because the main media has its agenda, and everybody complies with this agenda, not even seeing the obvious things, right? So again, we are coming to the conclusion that there is no way to expect that people would be reasonable creatures that will try to exercise their democratic rights or come out to the streets without the organizing force, and very strong organizing force that would move them to the streets. Don't forget that for 20 years, the propaganda was making fun of Ukraine. Ukrainians themselves were not very, very fond of Ukraine. They were criticizing it a lot. Like this national unity that we see now is something that we're not used to before, all right? So also, like another thing is that we all, Ukraine is a very young nation in terms of independence. It was independent for the short period of time historically, but those 30 years of independence is just 30 years. Most of the adults remember that it was all part of one country. In our mental map, we really do not see the difference between you and me and anybody else. We have a pretty close mentality, culture, likes and dislikes, joint past. And therefore, all those divisions seem to be not natural and somehow artificial, like insisting that those are different nations. You can say 1,000 times, but mentally, how we came to this world to remember that we live all in one huge country and we are all the same, mentally, it will be still with this generation. That's how this generation perceives the whole, at least 3 countries, Slavic countries, Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia. You need to change the generation in order to change this mental map that exists and in their minds or our minds. Even if we support the idea of separate countries and independence deep in our mind, it is one entity. We're very close because our past, our roots are very much the same. Again, we cannot base on that anything that is done. On that fact, you cannot kill people. You cannot bomb the cities. You cannot do anything from what is done on that basis. It's the same thing if a lady wants a divorce. You cannot kill her for that. The fact that you live 27 years with the same lady and then she wants a divorce, it doesn't justify that you go and kill her or beat her up or cut some parts of her and keep it for yourself. But that's exactly, if we're talking about the same analogy that Putin said, нравится, не нравится, красавица. So an analogy like the relationship with the woman, I'm sorry, you can't do that. If they want to be separate, they have to be separate. You need to respect the decision of people. And if it is forced, it always was a choice for those 30 years. Those that wanted to migrate from Russia to Ukraine already have done it many times. And those who wanted to migrate from Ukraine to Russia have done it. And there were many professionals that were living in both countries. So no justification can be used for anything that is happening right now, okay? But denying the common roots and the fact that we have Russians and Jewish, their international thing, so much in common. Of course we do. Of course we do. And it's like fighting yourself. That's the problem, right?
Well, returning to political rights, we granted them as a privilege. Why now we talk about political rights as about obligation or duties? What do you think? If political rights is a privilege or is it a duty?
It's none. It's an illusion. It's just another way to justify the power. In all times, power was sacred, like it was given by God, like Pharaoh or the king. Why was he a king? Because he was either a descendant of God or son of God. So there was a myth that was holding together the idea that one person or the group of people supposed to be superior and to rule and manage the rest of the people. But with the time when the religious beliefs have disappeared almost, or nobody's taking them serious anymore, except some radical fundamentalists in different religions. So since then, religion could not anymore supply the support to the justification of power. And having power based only on force is tricky. So the good thing is to find the new kind of lie that would be sufficient to make person to believe that the way how the country is run is a normal and acceptable way. So this lie is democracy, which is based on the assumption that if anything happens in the country, it's your fault. You didn't go to vote, you didn't do things, you theoretically have the right to participate in politics and such. And it always was that way, it is that way, and it will be that way. Because when you have more than two people, it's easy to manipulate them by saying different lies. And in the end, even if you don't fake the results, you still can manipulate them, like I said, by choosing the candidates that do not express their beliefs and their desires, by depriving them from direct democracy. Like long ago, we can get rid of parliaments. With such internet connection that we have, long ago, we can organize that each and every individual will be able to review the laws, to suggest the laws. We have huge communities like Facebook, like Wikipedia, where the crowds are self-organized to such a degree that they're very successfully acting in this way or another, with their flaws, of course, but still. If there would be such a desire, that's not a problem. For example, in Iceland, they had such a suggestion to change the constitution, and the majority has voted to change the constitution entirely. Guess what? The parliament has banned to change the constitution. Like the majority of people wanted to change it, but the parliament didn't accept that. So, like with this idea with the taxes, that it's so outdated to expect that people will go and report their taxes and such, there is a technical way to deduct those small amounts from each transaction, and then you don't need to have all this tax system and so on. The same with the politics. We know that in Switzerland, they have so many referendums on different topics, and they're all electronic. Nobody wants to go to this system, but still, even such system is easily manipulated. It is manipulated. And it is because of the assumption that the individual is a reasonable, adult, serious entity, which is not. People are compulsive, psychotic, and especially when it's anonymous, when nobody knows, incognito. They might do things that it's hard for them to explain later why they voted that way or another. And we know in history so many examples of those obvious failures to make a wise decision, to make a good choice. Another thing is imperfection of our world, that actually any choice will never be good one. Because in any good choice, there might be some consequences that are no good in some respect. And that's how we end up actually with nothing at hand. This system of mythological, political, democratic society is just the same fake as it was when we believed that our monarch is coming down as a descendant of God. And sometimes with the monarch even, it might have been more stable, because when we see the democracies like Israel, where there are so many parties, they have to do elections 3 times a year. All the prime minister can think of is how to stay in power. He doesn't care about anything else. So he can be easily manipulated by any even small force in the parliament to go sideways. We saw those unstable democracies, and they are just chaos. Another thing that we have to say, look, the governments have taken upon themselves the rights and privileges that we have never intended to give them. We do not need them to make war, to do crazy things, to help the countries that we barely know what's the names of those countries, to sell the weapon to both parties that engaged in war, to steal our money, to invest them in different things that are no good, and do thousands and thousands of stupid things that any government does, any government. They were supposed to regulate some things that we have the difficulty to regulate within our own communities. When you leave people of certain communities alone somehow, they survive. Somehow they find the balance. This is the myth that they start killing each other right away. It doesn't happen right away. At some certain point, yes, it might happen, because if there is an absence of the external force that can ultimately stop the internal aggressor, then it can lead to the extermination of the population by each other. Even we have those movies when people caught, either it's a post-apocalyptic world or just stranded on an island, where in the beginning, they're very cultural, civil, nice, polite, and in the end, they turn into the wild beasts. Yeah, it can happen, but it still happens even when we have those police forces. And it often happens to those who have the power, police forces, the army, and such and such. Look what Russians do in Ukraine. They don't have to do this. I'm not sure if they were taught to do whatever they do, all right? Like they do a lot of extra shit that they might have avoided doing. It's only because they want to do this and they can do this. So that's why they do. I mean, the violence and other stuff, right? So it's another myth that the government is here to organize things in an efficient manner. In many cases, they do not organize things in an efficient manner. The countries that we're so fond of, like always bringing as an example, Canada, Switzerland, Scandinavian countries, you can find the local reasons why they're thriving, why everything is so good in there. It can be sources of income. It can be inflow of high-quality, ambitious immigrants, the proximity to great economy like Canada that actually is almost a part of the US economy. And also the mentality of the people. Sometimes the people are different. You come to one house unexpectedly, and you see everything is so clean and nice and organized. You come to another house unexpectedly, and it's chaos. But in both cases, they are quite okay with themselves. The same are different mentalities in different countries. When you come to some Arab countries and you see all this mess on the streets and it's fine with them. When they immigrate to other countries, sometimes they accept what is accepted in those countries. Sometimes if there are too many who immigrate, they try to do the same thing that they are comfortable with. And I must say, it's not even intrinsic to individual. I was in different environments and I follow the rules of those countries. Like when I lived in Norway, I stopped throwing cigarette butts on the pavement. I used to smoke back then because nobody does this. It's outrageous. But coming back to Israel, for example, maybe for a couple of days you still don't do this, and then you just start doing it again. So this influence is very important. What's the mentality? What is normal for one people is not normal for others. And when we start to compare, then we get in trouble because we suppose that what is acceptable in our place should be universal. All right? And it's not like that. People are different still. So this is the third problem, to suppose that you give the voice to people, they will do the right thing. They might do even worse in so many ways. That's why I've never written a book about democracy. I know how to set it up efficiently, that every citizen will be able to come home after work and choose either to participate as a parliamentarian or not, and even get compensated for this work, going through the laws, submitting their voice. It's all possible, but I never wrote this book because I'm not convinced that such system even going to do anything good. What might be good, you will be laughing probably, but the artificial intelligence, when we outsource certain things to artificial intelligence that doesn't want to steal money, doesn't want to manipulate in a way somehow, doesn't have pride, doesn't have all those ambitions that humans have, it might be more beneficial to some systems, and it's already that way. There are some systems that's fully automatic and not influenced by people. But another thing is that when people set up those systems, they still program into those systems all the flaws that human beings have. But probably decisions how to distribute the funds, how to deal with different health issues and other things, they better off if they are based on artificial intelligence. But again, who is going to give up their power to some stupid machines when, if I can do it in an old way, I can steal millions and millions of dollars, buy to myself all kinds of stupid gold things and sit like a king on my very own toilet made of gold. Why would I give up all this kind of power that a lot of nations still in this stage of the chief of the African tribe, or even worse? Okay, so here you are. Your question, this is not the solution to expect that people will change anything in this situation. if you want to come back to the situation between Russia and Ukraine, it was unexpected. It was unexpected by many experts, and we didn't see this coming. Even though, obviously, they were concentrating their military forces along the borders and making all kinds of ultimatums saying that if you don't give us this and that, we will use the techno-military ways. Nobody have seen this coming, and it looks like the leadership really have turned into the crazy one in Russia, as it usually happens. Usually it takes less time to do such a degree of things, right?
At your speech, you approach a balanced problem between centralization and decentralization. And this, for me, when people exercise their political rights, they move system towards decentralization. And if they refuse to exercise their political rights, they move system towards centralization. And this is exactly what happened there in Russia. When people, they did not exercise their rights. They did not want to take this duty, to take this responsibility. So they delegated to the very centralized authorities, which make very centralized authoritative decisions.
Yeah,
in this respect, what I would like to ask, what about responsibility? If the decision has been made by the centralized authorities, are people still responsible for their decision just because they did nothing? What do you think?
People are not responsible for anything. People are creatures that were born yesterday and are going to die tomorrow, that have very little influence on anything, even in their personal lives. They do tremendously stupid things with their kids, with their husbands, with their lives, and putting on their shoulders an extra responsibility for the geopolitics is just outrageous. And that's one of the purposes of the myth of democracy, to tell people that's your fault. That's your fault. No, people are not responsible for anything. I mean, common people like you and like me, we are just living our lives. And all we want is to live our lives and to see that others are living good lives too. Because if we switch on TV and we see how our friends and family and everybody else is dying, it doesn't matter who is shooting at whom, it is not acceptable, but we really, really, really can do nothing. We can just talk about it, but we will be outshined by the propaganda from either space. Important to understand and not promote this myth that each of us is responsible for anything. We are not. We are coming into the system which is flawed, which is built in the same way for thousands of years, and nothing really changed. Just the cover has changed, but the essence is the same. And blaming people for that, it's pointless. It's pointless.
I'm sorry, but that sounds very much like an animal life. But humanity, humanity, all history, what we are doing, we change the world to make it comfortable for our life. We do what
It's
animals
very
do.
questionable whether it's really comfortable. It's just we used to
Anyway, we
think.
change the world more than animals do. Animals more tend to adapt to the world, while humans tend to change the world.
Go and tell this to
work
beavers.
to our
You know the
needs.
beavers are babry. Go tell
Yes,
them
no,
that.
they change a lot of ecosystems.
And
Of course, that's
actually, the
for
truth
example.
is, everything we see is made by life. All those limestone, that's the organisms that used to be in the ancient oceans. The oxygen in the atmosphere, it turns out a result of the photosynthesis of, like, it's a little bit of a myth as well to think that life just adjusts itself. It adjusts the nature as much as it can. And the problem here is that we are thinking of ourselves, we are thinking too much about ourselves. But the truth is, we are not that prominent and capable. And if we go back to our inability to organize things that such things will not happen in the modern world, that's a great example. Like, look what happens, and nobody can do anything about it. One crazy fucking idiot decided to replay the Second World War, whatever side he associates himself. And the whole world is just standing by and can nothing do about it without ruining the whole world. That's on one hand. On another hand, I have to tell this in the end, because I know that nobody likes to hear that. But everybody forgot that America was doing all in their power that the situation that we have now would happen. Everything in their power. And they are the main beneficiary of what's going on right now. They just stand aside and nobody is talking about it. But that's them, guys. Without them, nothing would happen. Nothing would happen. Yes, Ukraine was a satellite state for Russia. It would stay satellite state, as Belarus or Kazakhstan or anything else. If they wouldn't interfere in the politics with such degree that the vice president at that time, Biden, would come into your country, sitting with your cabinet of ministers and dictating them what to do and not what to do, and so many other things that have been done. Nobody is blaming them. Yes, Russians are awful. Putin is awful. But it's the same. Imagine that Putin is just the wall, brick wall. And you take a child and pushes it against the brick wall. And then you say, you need to blame the brick wall. And that's what happened. They were pushing it to happen the way it happened. And it's not about appeasing the aggressor and not appeasing the aggressor. They wanted it to happen.
I would not compare Putin with a child. Well,
no, Putin is not a child. He's a brick wall. Ukraine is a child. And Ukraine is a nice, naive child who is pushed against the wall. And And that's not just my opinion. If you look at the history and what have happened, this is repeated so many times in so many countries, in so many ways. Like, if you want to make your enemy weaker, don't fight him directly. Find someone that he will be fighting with, drag him, lure into the local border war, like it was with Soviet Union with Afghanistan. Afghanistan actually ruined Soviet Union. Not many realize that, but that's one of the facts. So here we go. He was lured into this sort of Afghanistan that probably not tomorrow, but with the time might ruin Russia as a whole, and everybody's talking about it. And how you do this, you're just trying to provoke your enemy to get engaged with the local wars. And I'm sorry, yes, you would say, oh, it's a Russian propaganda. It doesn't make them good. They are fucking idiots. They're very cruel and ruthless people. But it doesn't take away the fact that this situation has been created and is being created all the time. This is the part of the American politics. This is the part of the Roman politics. Divide and rule. Remember? Divide and rule. Okay? So the fact that everybody have forgotten that, it's bad. Because if you don't talk about this, if you don't point out those things, then yeah, that's the problem.
Yes, it is. But I do not want to extend this topic just because we need support of the United States right now. So I would not like to offend anyone from that side at the moment.
Of course you need support, because they brought you into this situation and they are worsening the situation, and they are not giving you support enough. They are given just enough to keep this fire going. They could have done way more. Like, there are so many ways, the same thing like Russians did. You can bring real military forces, NATO forces, give them, change the uniform to Ukrainian, say that they're volunteers, and get Russians out. They have unlimited forces. They can stop it militarily, still pretending that they are not participating. They are not doing that. They're just talking. And to say unpleasant thing is that when they say they sent you $1 billion of aid, we know what will happen with most of this aid. Those people that were stealing in your country, they did not disappear. They are saying, oh, more aid. A lot of this weapon will end up in Africa, in countries where not supposed to be. They will be stolen. The money will be stolen. And we all know that. And you know that. And Americans know that. Russians know that. The system and the mentality of Ukraine was the way before the war. Do you think that way? Do you think that those have been stealing the money all of a sudden said, oh no, we are not going to steal that once? Those that have made a fake deal with the vaccine with India and somehow bought their bullshit vaccine, remember? The same people in the same government will keep stealing money, a lot. And for example, the way how they could have helped, right? Another thing is they could have signed anything with Russians in the beginning. They were not going to accept, you don't have to accept Ukraine into NATO. You could have signed anything you wish to prevent whatever happened. Putin would die in 3, 4, 5 years without this war, and then you can forget about these papers. Things have changed. You can change, yeah, you promised not to take those countries into NATO. Close down NATO, create the new alliance that would not be bound by those agreements. Like there are thousands ways, there were 1,000 ways to satisfy whatever Russians were asking without doing anything, just the papers. They were saying that Ukrainians, we cannot rely on them, they're not really independent. But Americans can lie as good as anybody else in diplomacy. Like when they asked those documents, they should have agreed to those documents and leave everybody alone. Guys, they were just provoking the situation that had happened. Yes, it doesn't remove any of the responsibility from these barbaric fascists that are doing the thing that they're doing, I mean Russia. But come on, it could have been prevented. It could have been prevented. If the true purpose was not to allow people to get killed, but that was not the purpose. The purpose was to drag Russia into the local military conflict along its borders.
And one more question. If we say that people responsible for nothing, should they bear the consequences, or should they be protected from the consequences?
People
I speak
should
exactly
not
about
be.
sanctions right now, that many Russians are not agree with the sanctions. They say that as we are not responsible, you have no right to harm us.
Guys, sanctions are as stupid as everything else. Putin always wanted to make agreements, to have talks, to have concessions like Yalta style and things like that. And they majorly ignored him in all his attempts to draw attention to him and to his ways of thinking. And instead of sanctions, they should have gone to him, maybe secretly, and make sure he pulls his military force away as soon as possible. Give him whatever he wants, not in terms of territory, of course, in terms of papers. This stupid lad thinks that if he signs a couple of agreements, like Pact, Ribbentrop and Molotov, he will stay in history. Let him have these papers. Yes, we will not move NATO. Yes, we will blah, blah, blah. Do it, whatever. Move away your forces. That's all. That's what diplomacy is supposed to do. Not to provoke and lengthen the conflict. They are saying that there's no point to speak to Ukrainian government because it's not independent. It is not independent. Nobody is denying it, especially now. They want to make agreements with Americans. So Americans are supposed to make those agreements if they really don't want that people die. Instead of influx of the weapons, that most of the Ukrainian army doesn't know how to deal with, I'm sorry. Because there are weapons that they know how to deal with, and some sorts that they didn't deal before. Okay? And the fact that they are just sending these weapons or promising to send these weapons, it just worsens the situation. It actually gives the ability to Russia to say that America by proxy and NATO by proxy is part of this war, and make them the legitimate targets, which happens because when those convoys with weapons crossing the border of Ukraine, they just try to destroy them. It is obvious the Western part doesn't want to make any concessions. Their suggestion to Russia and to Putin, just go and die. The same as was with Saddam Hussein. You have 24 hours to leave the country that you are leader of with your sons, remember? Or else. And then they came and there was else. They just hang him up. I don't say that he was a good leader. He tried to kill me while I lived in Israel with his missiles and stuff. But that's not the way how you're supposed to do the politics. Igniting the wars, killing millions of people, all right? And nobody's talking about, Russian talking about, but nobody listened to them anymore. But that's still the fact. Even now it can end. They can go to Putin and say, okay, listen, pull all your guys, leave all the territories that you have taken. And I will lift we will lift the sanctions, and that's all. And he might say yes, and he might pull them out for the sake of some peace agreement that they do somewhere. And people stop dying, and the country is saved, and everything is fine.
Well, I'm sure that he would agree. I believe that he
Of course, he needs this Kherson, completely destroyed Mariupol, and these two fucking little republics, quasi-republics. I don't know. The main thing is here that the position of the West towards the aggressor is provoking the aggressor. I agree that appeasing the aggressor, as it was in Munich in 1938, is a bad idea. But provoking the aggressor is neither good idea. We have a very good friend, natural death, that will sooner or later will occur with him. And other good friend is like diseases or other stuff. Just push it away, like your very good respected president said. Let's push away into the future the decision about Crimea for 20 years, right? It's a good solution. If you see that this generation is not capable to resolve this issue, maybe in 20 years, all those leaders will not be with us anymore. Maybe this will be absolutely out of the question. What is the status? Maybe it will be not a question anymore, which sometimes happen, because when generations that were born into the internet era are coming to power sooner or later, they might see geopolitics completely different than Putin, who allegedly do not use the internet. So can you imagine how he sees the world? He still thinks that the world is the world of 1940s or 60s. So, yeah, and still, like, can Russia change the situation? No, it can't. If they pull away, it's bad for them. If they persist with the war, it's bad for them. Any move that they do is bad for Russia. Can Americans change? Yes, they can. Of course they can. But they don't want to. That's exactly what they wanted the Russia to get into. And they got it into. I will not be surprised if in 20, 30 years, there will be revelations that somehow, personally, this Biden have told Putin, as they like to do whatever you need to do, we will do nothing. When they met in person, remember, they did it with Saddam. When Saddam started his occupation of Kuwait, it is a fact, he was promised that United States will not oppose that. He was promised. And when he did, then they brought the ultimate. They are doing this same trick all the time. All right? Same as here. Maybe he was given the hint that do whatever you do and nothing will happen. And that, you know what, and there is another secret that we still do not understand. How in 8 years, pretty weak army with very limited resources has turned into the force which is efficiently preventing Russia from achieving their objectives. Okay? It looks like it was the way to lure Putin into this war. And this trying to lure into the war happened before the First World War, Second World War. It's always the same mechanism to lure Russia into the war and then destroy it.
But maybe it's time to be wiser from Russia.
It's time to be wiser for all people, that the national ideas are outdated. There cannot be national ideas in the world where the connections are built across the borders so easily. And some individuals in very different countries have a lot more in common in business, in love affairs, in so many ways than people that live next door. So neither geographic or national or other things are not relevant to the world of 2022. They are forced upon us through the pandemics that has divided us, but on other hand, has strengthened our virtual connections. This very talk that we're having right now wouldn't be here without COVID, because that's when we all got used to use the Zoom as a standard way of communication and Skype and filming these talks. So absolutely not relevant, all those things. Doesn't matter how it sounds to people in Ukraine who are having a very strong feelings about national identity, but it doesn't matter anymore, neither for business, nor for love affairs, nor for anything. It's an outdated concept, which is forced upon people, and people are getting killed on the basis of those myths, whose territory was this and that territory. Doesn't matter. What matters is that the rights of the person is protected, that he is well treated, that he has a health care, that he is not abused by anyone and not killed by anyone. That matters. And how you call the nation that he belongs to, it doesn't matter at all. But people that running the show, they don't want to abandon this, because those myths are very strong and very comfortable to manipulate people, to make people enemies, to make people act in so many ways that they wouldn't be rationally act on the basis of national myths. Here we are.
So let's summarize our dialogue.
It's not
About political rights and about active role of people to exercise their political rights or not to do that.
We do the only thing we can do. We express our mind freely, and we are trying to put it out on the internet right now. And we might have more influence that way than if we go to the polls, if we go and vote. Because like I said, our vote doesn't mean anything anywhere. And making the right mind probably is a better thing. To see clearly the manipulations on both sides, to see clearly the causes and effects. Do not forget what happened before the things that are happening now, to see a better perspective, to look upon everything with the point of view of the modern reality is a better way than trying to participate in corrupted, manipulative systems, which we call democratic rights. The main idea is, if none of these soldiers would go to Ukraine, if they would come to the border, see that they are forced in, they would just turn back and said no. And such thing cannot happen because they fear that they will be persecuted for that. They want to do unlawful things because they are ruthless and cruel people, some of those soldiers. But we know that many people didn't want to participate in this. Even they made those stamps, if it's not fake news, that this is a traitor who didn't want to participate in special operation. But the main thing with people is that to make them think for themselves, to understand better the manipulations that are going on, and not let themselves to be manipulated as much as they can. The best example is the cats. The cats are very difficult to manipulate. So humans, be cats.
But cats are not social creatures.
So then don't be that social when it comes to this. All right? Like our will, if we would be almighty, that it would never happen, that it was a dream, a nightmare, that Russia attacked Ukraine, that the cities have been destroyed, that all those atrocities have happened. But we cannot undo the history. So immediately we would want all the forces withdrawn, the war stopped, and such and such. And this will is will of many, many people that feel very much uncomfortable, to say the least, with what's going on. And we have no mechanisms except to speak up, like I do right now, even though nobody would listen. But hopefully one day those seeds will give a better fruit. Thank you very much for listening to me and participating and asking those questions.
Thank you for this exciting discussion.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. See you soon.